Hi, algebra students. Welcome to today's lesson on an introduction to the order of operations. So a lot of you guys maybe learned this as G.E.R.M.D.A.S, okay? But you're going to see that I call it G.E.R.M.D.A.S. So again, you guys would have learned this as G.E.R.M.D.A.S. Now, the reason I call it G.E.R.M.D.A.S is because the P in G.E.R.M.D.A.S makes it sound like you're always just going to look for parentheses. Now, parentheses are these curved grouping symbols, okay? But they're not the only grouping symbol that exists. There are also brackets that are more square, and there are also absolute value grouping symbols that we're going to study this year, okay? So I use G for grouping symbols, and when you are faced with a problem that you need to simplify, you're going to have to pay attention to which grouping symbol they're using. Parentheses do not change the value of a number. So if you see a 2 in parentheses, that just means that it's a value of 2. If you see brackets around a number, that also means that the value is still just 2. However, absolute value is the distance that a number is from 0. And distance is always positive. Even if you run a mile backwards, you still ran 1 mile. You didn't run a negative mile, okay? So it's always positive. So if you see, for example, the distance, the absolute value of -2, then that is asking you how far is -2 from 0. So -2 is 2 spaces from 0. What about +2? How many spaces is +2 from 0? Feel free to use a number line to draw it out. So here's +2, here's -2, right? They are both 2 spaces away from 0. The next part of the order of operations after grouping symbols, remember you're always going to do that first, and we're going to practice this soon, okay? After you look for grouping symbols, you're going to look to see if there are any exponents or roots. Roots are also, you'll see later on in your math career, roots are also called radicals. Roots, radicals. But that's what you're always going to do second when you're simplifying an expression. Now remember, exponents are little numbers that are on the top right corner of another number that's bigger. So the bigger number is called the base. The smaller number is called the exponent. Now, what does an exponent do? An exponent tells you how many times you need to multiply the base with itself. So since the base is 3, it means it wants you to multiply 3 with itself 2 times. So the answer here is 9. So be careful because it's not saying 3 times 2. So it's not saying that they want you to multiply 3 times 2, which is 6. They want you to multiply the 3 with itself 2 times. Now, one of the common mistakes that we see in algebra that students and sometimes other people make is that if you have a negative number in parentheses that is squared, any negative number to the second power means that you need to put that negative twice with the base. So -3 times -3. Negative times negative is positive. So the answer here would be +9. If the parentheses weren't there, so let's say it had been like this, then the negative would only show up one time as like a -1, and then the 3 would show up twice. That would be an answer of -9. Okay? But if the negative is a quantity, okay, if the negative is included and you're multiplying it twice, then negative times negative is positive. Okay, so square roots ask you what number to the second power or times itself would give you that answer. So the square root of 16 is what number times itself is 16. The correct answer is 4. So the square root of 16 is 4. some other square roots, right? Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2. So some of these should look familiar. Square root of 9 is 3, and we can go forever and ever and ever. Okay. The third part of the order of operations is to look for multiplication and division. Now those have to be done from left to right, so you have to do whichever one comes first. Now let's take a look at this example over here. We have division and multiplication. Because of the way that PEMDAS and G.E.R.M.D.A.S is spelled, people think that multiplication always goes first. But in fact, multiplication and division have the same importance. You just have to do whichever one you see first when you're reading the problem from left to right. So if I'm reading it from left to right, the first thing that I see is the division. So here I would do 18 divided by 6 first. And then I can do, so the 18 divided by 6 is 3, bring down the multiplication, and then I could do the multiplication. So 3 times 3 is 9. Now, a couple things that I want to make sure you guys know is that multiplication can show up in different ways. Okay, so I'm going to write it over here. Different ways to write multiplication. So I'm going to use the numbers 2 and 3. All right, so you may have seen that little x, right? That means multiplication. There's also a dot, a large dot, not a decimal, that can signify multiplication. Also, if you put a number next to another one in parentheses, that means multiplication. If you have pretty much any number in front of grouping symbols, that represents multiplication. Okay, so whether the grouping symbol is a bracket or parentheses, all of those mean that you're multiplying 2 times 3. The only exception is right here. You'll have to take the absolute value of 3 before you multiply it with 2. So as I look at this next problem from left to right, I see negative 10 in front of the grouping symbol of 3. That signifies multiplication. That means you have to multiply. So there's multiplication, then division, and then multiplication again. So you want to go from left to right. So I'm going to do the multiplication first, bring down everything else, and then keep going from left to right. So now I'm going to do negative 30 divided by 2 is negative 15. Bring down the times 3. And finally, negative 15 times 3, negative 45. The very last thing that you do when you're following the order of operations is addition and subtraction. So again, because of PEMDAS and G.E.R.M.D.A.S, whichever one you remember learning previously, people always think addition comes before subtraction, but that's not true. They have to be done from left to right. So as you look at this next example, you have 4 minus 2 plus 7. Well, addition doesn't go first unless it's written first. Here, the subtraction is written first. 2 plus 7 is 9. Notice that I brought down the 7, and that's your final answer. So you have to go from left to right. Now, in this next example, we have, if I read it from left to right, 8 minus 2 times, remember any number in front of grouping symbol means that it's multiplication, 2 times 3 plus 1. Remember, we're following G.E.R.M.D.A.S or PEMDAS, and grouping symbols must always be done first. I see grouping symbols right here with the 3 plus 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do what's inside the grouping symbols first. Remember, we're following the order of operations. And as we learned up here, you're always first going to work with anything inside the grouping symbols, parentheses, brackets, or absolute value. So 3 plus 1 is 4. Then I'm going to bring everything else down the same. I put the little dot for multiplication, but you don't have to. You can also just keep it as 8 minus 2 parentheses 4. Okay, so as I'm following G.E.R.M.D.A.S, right, or PEMDAS, after I do anything inside the grouping symbol, I'm going to look for exponents and roots. But I don't see any exponents or roots in this problem, so don't have to worry about that. Next comes multiplication or division from left to right. As I read this problem, I have multiplication. So I have, if I read it from left to right, the subtraction means that the 2 is negative. So when I multiply these, it's negative 2 times 4, which is negative 8. After I'm done with multiplication or division, I move on to addition and subtraction, which is the only thing that's left, and our answer is 0. Okay, if you need any help with what you learned in this video, feel free to reach out to me and let me know how I can help you. Have a good day.